All right, why don't we get started? Thank you everybody for being here. Good morning. And actually what I'd like to do, if you haven't been to one of my panels before, I usually say good morning and everyone just sits there, so the proper response is good morning, Marty. So let's take it from the top. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Marty.
There we go. Thank you very much. That helps make sure everybody is wide awake and ready to go, because we've got some really good information that we're going to be discussing today. This is Future of TV, Wall Street Analysts Meet Industry Executives. It's all about innovation and disruption, chasing the new normal in the entertainment and technology industries. What I like to do is to put some of what we're going to talk about in context, is give you the overall formal description that we have of the panel. Perhaps you've seen it in the catalog or online, but let me go through it now because it will help frame what we're going to be discussing. We're in a period of rapid, if not accelerating, change in the way that content of all kind is produced, distributed, and consumed. In the past, no matter what kind of content, well-defined distribution windows were normal and were followed consistently by distributors. And that's no longer the case. That's not meant to be a major revelation, but that's no longer the case. Those distribution windows and other barriers have been broken and will never be repaired or returned to what was normal. Companies, some new and disruptive, and others that have long been mainstream players, are searching for what might be the new normal as a means of attracting an audience to their offerings in the increasingly fragmented marketplace. The future of TV involves deep insight into both the qualitative and quantitative aspects of content production and distribution, and the impact that the technology may have on the many competitive and high-stakes business models in place today and anticipated for tomorrow, shaped in part by a myriad of devices and content vying for our attention, as well as the potential impact of governmental regulation. Our distinguished group of analysts and executives will discuss, debate, and even challenge some of the basic premises that are important as we look to the future of TV as an informative and engaging panel. So what I'd like each of the panelists to do is take a moment and give you a quick overview of who they are, what they do, and how that ties into what we're going to be discussing. We'll start with my immediate left, and Cathy Hetzel, if you would, please.
Good morning. I'm Cathy Hetzel. I'm Executive Vice President with ComScore. And ComScore is a company that dynamically measures cross-platform in a dynamic cross-platform world. And I think the key phrase there is dynamic, because a lot of what Marty talked about in terms of his opening is all about the changing habits of consumers and how do we as a business make sure that we understand and are measuring them effectively in order to provide all sorts of clients, both content creators as well as other companies that play in the advertising space, the information they need to be able to make sure that they monetize effectively on every platform.
Thank you. And to her left, James Marsh, Lionsgate.
Great. Hi, my name is James Marsh. Work at Lionsgate, heading up the investor relations group there. Spent 20 years as a Wall Street analyst, so this is kind of a unique panel for me where I feel like I have one foot back in the old analyst world and one foot in the, call it the real world. But very excited about what's going on at Lionsgate. We've got a substantial TV business there, 40 different episodes on 80 different episodes on 40 different networks, and we're excited about the future.
And to his left, Laura Martin of Needham & Company.
Hi, I'm a Wall Street analyst, and my practice revolves around mobile, social, and video, so where the puck is going, and I cover Apple, Facebook, and Disney, one of the few that covers all three sectors. And so our practice is really looking at the intersections of those and how that affects, my background is mostly content coverage, so I've covered CBS and Disney and Viacom for 20 years. So, and just looking at how content is changing, specifically the economics. Wall Street cares primarily about the bottom line and the money. They don't care so much about what consumers are doing, but how it affects money is definitely first tier question to us. So, and so I work currently for a company called Needham & Company, which is a technology-based in a research firm.
Okay, and to her left, last but not least, Larry Namer, a true pioneer in the industry.
Okay, I guess that's good. Larry Namer, probably best known in the U.S. for founding E! Entertainment Television, but for the last 5.5 years, I've been in China producing programming in Chinese, specifically for Chinese audiences.
Okay, well, thank you. Steve Barris will be here shortly. He's stuck in LA traffic. West Coast Technical Operations at HBO. His rest of his background is mostly technical, Apple certified. He worked at Photochem for a period of time, and when I first met him, he was with a startup post house called Plaster City, no longer in business. Last, I shouldn't say Steve was last but not least, but my name is Marty Schindler of the Schindler Perspective. We have a husband and wife consulting team. I'm the husband side of that. Our background, our combined backgrounds include a Big Four professional service firm, top 5 business school, hands-on experience or additional hands-on experience at companies such as 20th Century Fox, MGM, Lucasfilm, and Kodak. Through the years, we've worked at nearly every point on the entertainment and entertainment technology value chain and many of the points that intersect with that chain. And Steve Barris is here. A little round of applause for Steve. It's okay. So what I did, Steve, is without trying to recite your background, I said West Coast Technical Operations, you're Apple certified from the past, sure. Photochem at one point, and you and I met when you were at a startup post house called Plaster City.
That's exactly.
You want to add something to that before we get started with our questioning?
So. Not great at getting here from Santa Clarita, I think, is the another thing to maybe
well,
add.
we're glad you got here.
Here nonetheless. Apologize.
Okay. Now that is not a magic flower. If I try to sniff your flower, it's not going to squirt
to sniff
water
my
at
flower, Marty, but I don't know appropriate for this hour.
All right. Well, what I want to do is take a quick poll here. How many people are involved? How many people have a smartphone? Simple question. There we go. That's not really a surprise either. Broadband at home? Not every. There's some. How many people do not have broadband at home? Because there's a growing group of people in that category. TV producers, content distributors otherwise, press, handful of press. Okay, how many people just came for the bagels and coffee? There we go. Wait, there we go. Thank you. She says not really. I didn't mean to say that. Thanks, Melissa. All right, so the new normal. The topic really refers to chasing the new normal. The old normal was the basic set of broadcasters and cablers creating their own content or buying it from the studios and then following a set pattern of release windows and getting that out to the masses. So with the rate of change we've been seeing in the past few years and thinking ahead 3 to 5 years, are we likely to ever really see a new normal, or is constant change going to be the normal? Who's got that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say only that, I think it sort of is a steady state of change is maybe a good way to think of it. I don't actually know, especially from a programming standpoint, that you could really ever look at one sort of period in time and say that everything we made was exactly the same. There's always been outliers. There's always been things that differ from the norm. And I think the more those differences become popular, the more they become the norm, and then something else moves in to take that sort of place at the edge. I think that's true in content. I think that's true in technology. It's probably true in many things. So maybe there's a little bit more flux because technology is able to sort of push things forward more quickly than it has in the past. But I think that a constant state of flux is probably the steady state.
I think Laura's
I would have a different point of view. So I think the pendulum swings. And so we have content series being created at all-time highs. There's a lot of money being thrown at content. A lot of it will be written off. And we have a lot of money funding digital platforms and digital content experimentation. And as you know, the pendulum swings, money moves that way. When it doesn't get a return on its capital, it moves back. So the pendulum swinging, I think, has always been normal. But I don't think what we should expect to see is the pendulum swing and then stop, because I don't think that's normal. So I think capital gets allocated. And over time, we get consolidation into the winners. Guys like CBS had blow-away earnings. I mean, they had 43% advertising revenue growth because they had the Super Bowl, but excluding the Super Bowl, they grew revenue at 12%. 12 in a 4% growth business. And that's because, you know what? He is good at making content. They are good at allocating capital to content on Showtime, on CBS All Access. He is just a good content maker. So hit content in a content business is a good way to make money. Scatter's up 20% right now over last year's upfront. So if you have extra inventory because your ratings aren't down, you're making a ton of money. But again, I wouldn't call that normal because Viacom's numbers were down 5%. So it sort of depends on who's making the content.
So given what you're saying, though, with CBS, for example, you know, when people in the, call it the new fronts or the new companies that are doing digital-only distribution, there are people who once thought, you know, the old school folks are going to be out. And given all those numbers and everything, and old school including HBO, including Lionsgate that's been around, CBS certainly, they're not going to be out because they are expert at it and keeping up with all that.
Well, one of the things we're seeing in the digital world is as audiences fracture, hits make all the money, right? Because why? Because the way you get discovery is you share on your social network. So CBS is the beneficiary of that right now. That re-aggregation of eyeballs is coming through the social networks. So hits make more money in this world, and the long tail theory ended up being exactly wrong. It's very hard to make money on the long tail, and we saw that in the YouTube panel yesterday. There's 50 guys that make $1 million a year or more, and the other 4 million on YouTube don't make a living wage. That's the same idea. Hits make all the money.
Larry, I don't know, I couldn't tell if you were ready to say something or not. I know you're thinking about it.
I agree. I think, you know, particularly if you want to be an independent, you got to stay ahead of the game, not just in terms of what the audience needs are, but what the business models are going to be. I mean, we've done stuff, you know, where we realized that competing with the Rupert Murdochs of the world or the HBOs or the CBSs is not a great thing to do if you want to be an independent. So we actually moved our focus to China. We said, where can we be on equal footing with the Rupert Murdoch? And it also gives us much more of an opportunity to play with business models. As Marty always laughs at me, we had one series on the air in China for a while where we actually made more money selling shoes than we made on the TV show, but we really don't care. But we think that's something that you need to do. You know, if you want to be an independent, you got to constantly be innovating, not just in programming, but on the model side of it too. And sometimes that means getting involved in businesses that aren't considered part of traditional media world. So,
but you know, that begs the question, though, Larry. There are a lot of things that we, let's say, in the Western world, able to learn from doing something new and innovative, because sometimes we're stuck in our own traditions, we're stuck in various legacy models?
Yeah, I think, I'm not so sure it's new as opposed to taking what I know works here and then figuring out how and why to make it work in China. I mean, kind of where we've gone now is looking at the incredible cost of producing new series and pilots and stuff like that. If you want to start a new play, you don't start it on Broadway and then debug it under the highest set of, you know, of expenses. You take it to Connecticut, you put it there, you get it to work, you change the cast, you tweak the thing. So we now use China pretty much as that. So we've now focused on well, we still do a lot of made for China stuff. We create formats that we start in China, great set of economics. You know, I could pilot a show in China for $250,000 that looks like a $5 million pilot a year. So I get a lot of swings at the plate at $250. I make them work and then come back here. And the other reason that we like this model is, even for someone like me who's done a bunch of stuff here, I know when I go in and pitch Fox, I pitch them in the conference room, they look at me, they smile, I walk out, when the door closes, they go, that's a good idea, how do we do it without it? If I get it going in China, it then changes my leverage in dealing. I use Rupert Murdoch as the example of the devil when I'm dealing with Rupert.
That's funny.
We don't have to explain Rupert who, right? Kathy, I think
everybody knows.
you've got something. Please go ahead.
Well, I think-
A devil by any other name is still a devil.
I think the consumer has a huge role in all of this, and I feel that we've been through a phase of, I think, rapid innovation, which is exciting. New models of ways in which the consumer can get to the content that they want to watch, and that's great. It's been great for growth on digital and mobile platforms, particularly mobile. The thing to think about, however, is that now it feels like everyone is following suit. So subscription VOD worked for Netflix as an example, and now everyone has a subscription VOD service on their own. And then next are coming skinny bundles, and everybody's going to do a skinny bundle, and I'm exaggerating with the everybody's, but it does feel like someone has success on a model, and then the industry all jumps on board and everyone tries to make it. And here's the poor consumer sitting in the middle of all of this saying, well, geez, I just wanted to subscribe to my cable, satellite, or telco service and have, you know, this cool House of Cards thing that was coming, or Orange is the New Black, that's coming on Netflix, or a few. And I think I agree with Laura on the hit-driven information that she provided. So now I have to subscribe to 4 or 5 subscription services on top of my regular service in order to get the 4 or 5 shows that I want to watch. And I think we'll see high churn in and out of subscription bundles for that very reason, because I want to watch this certain show, but I don't want to carry that bill of still having my regular service and then adding something to watch a season or something.
Well, you know, that ties into the early days of cable when you got your set-top box and the key word used was addressable. So you could add or delete subscriptions at any time. Now online you can, you know, compete for who's got that best content. You know, you used the word innovation, which I think is my next topic. You've been looking at my notes, I think. But innovation is something that really helps to drive competition. It came out recently when the president said, you know, we need to have more innovation. The FCC took that to say, you know, we're going to open up discussions on set-top boxes as one example. Vizio has a new TV that has a Chromecast built into it. So I'm not even sure there's a tuner in that TV, and pretty soon we'll probably have no traditional TVs. It's going to be just a display device. Rovi just bought TiVo, or is in the process of that. So there's a lot of things going on from a consolidation point of view. But what about Apple? You know, is Apple behind the curve on innovation? A lot of rumor about that. I think their stock was down yesterday. What about other companies who are being who do we see that really, what's that next innovation moment that's lurking out there? James?
Got the hard ones.
I think Lori actually just volunteered you on that one. She said, she said you've got the most information and you're the smartest guy on innovation.
I think from a Lionsgate perspective, we're all for innovation because they're new customers for us. Whether they're new platforms like SVOD, direct-to-consumer over-the-top, you know, traditional pay television or broadcast. I think we like that competitive environment being a little bit more fierce. We're happy to provide that original programming. So we're not making any bets on any particular platforms. I think we're trying to remain flexible so that we can provide that content to our distribution partners.
And I would answer the Apple question by building on what Cathy said, which is the consumer is creating out-of-home mobile platforms. So there's 200 million smartphones in America, and there's 2 billion worldwide. So the consumer has spoken. He wants his content, his apps, his long and short form video out of home, or let's just say in-home and out of home. And that's creating new windows of time for usage, which is why we're seeing usage go up, but also new content windows, right? The sweet spot for smartphones is 2 minutes or less. And things as stupid as Snapchat keeping the screen vertical because the kids literally don't want to turn it horizontal quadruples the the resonance of the ad, just so because the kid doesn't have to turn it on its side. So what we're seeing now is the
parents can turn it for them.
Yeah, they could, and parents are always around. It's a fair point. So I think what we're seeing now is that there's the innovation pace in the digital space is super fast, and what we're seeing now is digital-only companies are threatening to undermine digital-first companies. A digital-first company is anyone who started on a desktop. So I think that's maybe the next wave, is people like Snapchat or digital only. And I will tell you, Cathy will probably have better numbers on this, but consumer usage of specifically smartphones, but let's just call it mobile devices, has been growing triple-digit rates, and now every single internet company I follow, TripAdvisor, Bankrate, Pandora, they all have over 50% of their traffic on mobile devices. Facebook's is 93% mobile device use. So if you aren't on a mobile device, if you can't monetize a mobile device, you're going to have a problem with Wall Street. We're going to mark you down because you've got to solve mobile monitoring. And Facebook today is 25% of total mobile ad revenue, 25%.
So mobile first as opposed to mobile only?
No, mobile only is going to do away with mobile first. Mobile first means you actually had desktop first.
So, anybody else before we move on? Okay.
I wouldn't count Apple out, by the way. I
agree.
I think they're a great company. I think they've tried some content plays and they haven't yet figured out what their content play is, but I think they have a content play other than just downloading that they're currently doing.
Well, and they just have so much money in the bank that if they decide to do something significant
buy
in
CBS.
Market, I mean, they can, right? I mean, they buy anybody,
buy Disney
right?
and write a check.
Exactly, cash. No, I think that, Apple, I think any of these technology companies, if you look at it as a problem of entertainment companies, media companies trying to get into the technology space, and technology companies trying to get into the media entertainment space. One is significantly more difficult than the other. The relationships that it takes to, create, culturally significant properties is a lot more difficult from a cultivation standpoint than developing the technology to deliver video to a customer or to cultivate that base of customers. So it makes sense for these, big technology companies to simply acquire this stuff. Like, why try to, sort of cultivate this grassroots content when content companies, in large part, maybe my own, are sort of for sale. They're just not worth that much money that you wouldn't go and say, why wouldn't buy it? We've been, obviously it's been something that's been in the news that Time Warner's been, almost acquired by, or there was an offer from Fox. So it's an environment where everything is sort of for sale, and I don't know that a company like Apple is going to be like, well, let's try to cultivate some relationships with content creators and start making content. I think they're just going to probably buy somebody.
So, but from an innovation point of view, and you talk about the cash that those companies have, if it was Apple, if it was Facebook, if it was Google, let's assume any one of those or another rich company. Even a rich company like Amazon or Netflix has a fair amount of cash, notwithstanding what they're spending on content. Is there something to be said that if they bought a Time Warner or a 21st Century Fox or any of the above, or Paramount, which is in deep challenge right now, is there something to be said that they would bring a new level of innovation to those companies, a new way of thinking?
Well, maybe not innovation, but I think if you look at Disney's a really great example of a company that realized a number of years ago that their mega strength was in monetizing distribution. And so they decided to go and buy the best content creators in the world, arguably, and take those franchises that were already existing, known good properties, had large universes that could be exploited in a pretty fantastic way, and find as many of those companies and acquire them as possible, and give them the resources they need to make as many of these things as possible, as quickly as possible, at the quality level that people expect, and they've been able to very effectively do that. And I think that, that's a very effective model of taking, a community of what would otherwise be distribution deals with these individual companies and simply acquiring them, giving them money to make, 4 Marvel movies a year and make, an extraordinary amount of money on it, because Disney has the power to monetize that, globally in a way that not many other companies can.
We see the trend right now of each of these companies having their own studios, and they're starting to make their own content. And I personally believe that it's a lot harder to do than some of these companies recognize. And I think some of my fellow panelists who have been doing it for many years know what that takes. And I think some of them will succeed, but I think a lot of them won't, and they'll go to plan B. And I do think that there is some amazing and fabulous content out there, and a whole wealth of it that is out there today. But I do think that if we can't figure out ways in which to monetize it effectively, some of it's going to go away. And I think, to Laura's point earlier, the monetization piece of it has to be where we look. And to build a studio is a really expensive proposition, to start it from the ground up. And if you're making 2-minute content, it's very different than if you're trying to make full feature shows, series, all the kinds of things that really drive the business.
Larry?
Yeah, I think, particularly when you get to tech companies and stuff, there are companies that know how to manage creatives and manage innovation, and then there are ones that don't. And I go through it all the time where, the Amazons and the Netflix, and I go in with an idea and then they tell me how to change, grandpa to grandma and, move it to Spain. But, you look at companies like Netflix have done an amazingly good job at realizing who's good at creating, giving them the fuel to let them go off and create. And then you look at other folks like Amazon, who have not done such a good job at that, where you go in with the script and they give you like more notes than you gave them pitches.
How's Hulu?
What?
How's Hulu?
Not so good. But, but you look at companies like Lionsgate, and I go back a long time with Kevin and stuff, who just continually do it. Some of it, unfortunately, has to do with this incredible corporatization that you have. And people in the tech companies like stuff in a very structured way. And while research is wonderful, sorry, Cathy, it's great at telling you what it is now, but what it does in a lot of cases, it stifles creatives in thinking what can be. And that's why everybody, when somebody does Game of Thrones, then you've got 10 more in genre, is because people just look at the research and go, that's what people want, and they think that it'll be forever, and it's never forever. Then somebody has the nerve to actually innovate and come up with a new form. And if you look at the history of visual content, it's been like that for 60 years.
I mean, you can't set out to make a viral video, for example, is partly what you're saying.
Right.
Yeah,
and when you look at the word, and Cathy used it a moment ago, culturally significant, at the table here, for example, Game of Thrones is certainly culturally significant these days in the way people react to it. Lionsgate had Mad Men, which just came out of the blue, I think, and was a unique idea that really resonated with mass audiences. But you can't kind of go for that in the beginning, or can you?
No, you can't go for it, but people who have creative instincts have good instincts. And what a lot of companies do is they stifle those instincts because, again, they rely too heavily on research of what is, as opposed to looking for what's going to break through.
I would just make one point on this issue of cultural significance. I think 20 years ago, cultural significance was gated by national boundaries, and today it's global. So the reason you see so many huge films like Star Wars, there were more films in 2015 that were over, I don't know, $200 million at the box office than ever. And that's what's culturally significant now, is something that talks to consumers and really kids around the world, because Facebook has made the world flat, smaller. So culturally significant isn't just a country anymore, it's the globe.
So when you look at it, say, from a feature film point of view in the box office, China's about to become, in the next year or two, certainly by 2018, #1 in the world, beating out North America in box office. So obviously, or maybe not so obviously, a lot of thought process is going into the development process. When we are developing this concept, this story, how do we look to forget North America? What are we going to do in Western Europe? What do we want to do in Asia? And I'm looking at it, say, from a movie point of view, because Asia, the Asia-Pacific region, is the fastest growing region right now, with China leading that. So, you know, do you plan for cultural significance in terms of not the Game of Thrones or Mad Men type of cultural significance, but getting involved in those cultures?
Well, I think, you know, as ComScore, of course, measures the movies around the world, and we are the only company that has 100% market share of worldwide box office measurement. I think a lot of times you think of us as digital and TV, but of course movies is a mainstay product for us. And what we have been doing with that information that we have globally is we're starting to move products analytics earlier on in the curve, and looking at social media, for example, with a product called Preact, where we begin to look at when a movie is announced, and then the characters that are in the movie, or the actors that are in the movie, get announced. We start to watch the social implications of, are we building an audience as we're announcing more about the movie, or are we not? Are we doing it early? And as we get earlier in the cycle, I think more and more, while today I agree with you, Larry, much of what we do in research is to report after the fact, we have to get better about using the information that we have to be more predictive before things come out, and allow the studios and the content makers to be able to make changes in process. Advertisers and agencies, I'd put that in the same bucket because it's all content. And the more predictive we can become with the research and the analytics that we have, and the more census-based everything that we do is, I feel that we have an opportunity ahead of us to help to shape the way these things are formed earlier in the cycle.
So that means taking the data and people, the people creating the stories, saying, all right, here's the elements we think you need to have. If you say that, and I don't disagree with it, how do you get to a point where there was a headline in the trades a few days ago about the Ghostbusters trailer being the most disliked trailer of all time?
I agree with that.
I agree with that. I saw that and said that movie's just not going to go anywhere.
It's got to be an example of probably what's going to be a fantastic one. I certainly hope I'm such a dyed-in-the-wool Ghostbusters fan, but it's very deep. It's a psychosis almost. But you know, especially listen, the father of a 19-month-old little girl to have a Ghostbusters movie, all women, when she's growing up. That movie for me, growing up, incredibly important. Scientists save the world. Engineering, technology saves the world. A very important message. For a movie that will be great, it's got to be. Look at the caliber of everybody involved in it. Fingers crossed. Yeah, for the trailer to be that bad, what from a research standpoint? Because that trailers are just that, right? What do you want to show people to get them annoyed? Like, where did that go wrong? How did that happen? Did no one look at that before it, like, is it a culture of just everyone saying, like, this looks so great, yeah, everybody, yeah, come on, this is going to be great, this is going to go viral. It is so fundamentally awful. It's a slapstick. I mean, I don't understand.
Now I want to watch it.
Yeah, oh my God!
I'm sure there's 2 or 3 people in the room right now watching that trailer. Is that right? With the sound off?
It feels awful.
Well, you did a great advertisement for it. I'm
no,
check it out.
Go watch the trailer. I mean, you know, the thing is it's got an extraordinary amount of hits because everybody's talking about how awful it is, so everybody goes and watches it. You know, is that kind of reverse marketing? Maybe, I don't know.
I don't think so.
I don't think anybody is not going to go watch the film because the trailer was so bad. I think it's getting a lot of negative sort of social around it, but yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's an awful trailer.
I have a question for Cathy.
We'll get to some Q&A in a couple minutes, okay? Keep it, write it down, and we'll get on with it. Because in fact, I don't know that if I said that up front. I always make sure we leave time for Q from you and A from us.
Can I make one quick comment just on the?
You probably can't make just one, but go ahead.
Probably, you're not wrong. Not about the Ghostbusters, just on the idea of sort of, you know, the sort of crowdsourcing of content, because it's something we've been sort of talking about an awful lot, is you know, our philosophy sort of from the inception of original programming at HBO, which obviously came much before me, has sort of been to find new original voices and really develop it in the sort of old studio model of developing things from scratch and not sort of just buying content from existing creators, but developing something that maybe people haven't seen that is a little bit different than is out there. 9 times out of 10, that probably doesn't work, right? 1 out of 10 we get a Girls, 1 out of 10 we get a Game of Thrones. But we might make Looking, which is an exceptionally good show, incredibly culturally important, a necessary story to be told, but maybe doesn't find an audience like a Game of Thrones does. But I think you sort of, to make Game of Thrones, you have to make a Looking. You have to, we think every show we make is great. They may not all be, as market appropriate from a product standpoint, but because the world we lived in was you're an HBO subscriber, we're only beholden to our subscribers. We don't care what advertisers think of our content. All we have to do is wholesale our product to essentially cable companies, affiliates. That is, of course, changed. We're now direct to consumer, so that feedback is instantaneous. And the world of direct to consumer on the platform side is that it's so easy to disconnect from our service. I don't know if anybody's ever tried to cut off their cable, but it's not exactly an easy process. And I think, had the luxury of that not being an easy process. But disconnecting from a Netflix, an HBO Now, and Amazon Prime, although nobody's doing that, the free shipping is too good. But it's instantaneous. If I decide, this month you guys don't have anything for me, I'm going to disconnect for a couple months, and maybe I'll come back in the fall when there's a new show. So now that feedback loop is so tight, I think it's something that every content creator now has to sort of say. Did you have something? Okay, you comment people trying to get rid of cable, and that's really leads me to my next set of comments. Cord cutting, cord nevers has been in the press a lot. Last year in particular, seeing all the different companies and the subscriber losses that they were having, and yet in the last quarter, Comcast, Charter, and Time Warner all reported additions to their video customers. Not necessarily significant, but they had positive versus negative. Comcast even stating that customers were going to skinnier bundles, and we'll get into a little bit more of that shortly. But with that in mind, there was a really interesting article in the LA Times a couple of weeks ago saying network sales executives say some of the marketing dollars that shifted to digital video advertising are coming back to TV. And that's good news after 2 straight years of revenue declines in the upfront market. One of the reasons they're increasing their spending is they're realizing they're not reaching enough customers through the commercials they bought on digital video sites. Advertising and media agency executives say the pendulum is swinging back to TV. It's easier to buy. Now, with that said, Laura got me some really interesting information yesterday, fresh information from the Internet Advertising Bureau, the IAB, about the upfronts and the new fronts. And a sentence that I'll read here before we ask for their comments. Advertisers and media buyers have made an impressive 114% increase in investments in original digital video programming over the past 2 years through the 3rd annual New Fronts. So what do these somewhat incongruous statements say about the future of TV? Larry?
Well, I mean, first, I think you got to think about who's making some of these statements and why they make them. I mean, if you're an ad agency and you could spread $100 million across one buy versus spread $100 million and you got to make 1,000 buys. So I think if you really look at it, you really want to be honest, what people are buying and the pendulum swinging is not necessarily is what most efficient for the brand that's spending the money, but really what works best and maximizes the margins for the ad agencies and the media buyers.
So, special interests.
Yeah, it's much easier to make one buy and sign one check than to do 1,000 because you're then picking out key parts of the audience.
Laura?
Okay, I would have 3 points. First of all, because I sent you that study.
Yes.
AOL was the biggest producer 2 years ago of premium digital-first content. They spent $5 million. So the fact that together, all of the guys just increased their spending by 115% on original, digital-first original content.
Small
they got
base.
to 30 million, big deal. Like, who cares? A. B, last year, you guys might recall, 30% of the largest advertisers were in agency review. We had more fired ad agencies than in the last, 50 years. in the middle of the upfronts. So no ad agency is going to walk into the upfronts and sign a contract with the devil or CBS or NBC to spend $10 million if they don't even know if they're keeping Coke or keeping General Motors. So no one bought in the upfront. Well, bad news, Scatter's up 20% over last year's upfront. So everybody who didn't lock in pricing got really screwed because they're having to buy in the spot currency market, the scatter market. So this year, that then drives the pendulum swings. After they all got screwed by scatter this year, they're all going to lock up upfronts. Upfront should be up a lot. Why? Because in the fourth quarter, we have political. If you don't sign up in the upfront for the fourth quarter, you're not getting an ad, because political, if it's Hillary and Trump, is going to be spending every dollar that's not, every ad unit that's not spoken for in the upfront is going to political in the fourth quarter. You're not going to be able to advertise for Christmas till after the elections are over. So I think upfront's going to be up really big. And let's just talk about what that number means. That means upfront will be about $10 billion, I think, but total TV this year will be $75 billion of ad revenue, and another 70 coming from Comcast, telcos. So the TV ecosystem that we're talking about is 150 billion of revenue a year. The digital ecosystem is, pick a number smaller than 100, maybe smaller than 50. So these are tiny, tiny numbers. So beware of comparing percents. So those are the numbers I would give. And Cathy probably has the best data on this, because she actually does this.
Please.
That's her core competence.
Well, I agree, and I was going to make the same point about all of the $30 billion in ad spend money that was available for and up for review last year, and some of that money is switching around. What I think is really exciting is this is the first year that we will absolutely have cross-platform, unduplicated reach numbers. And so, in a sense, the advertising community, both agencies and advertisers, have been buying a bit blindly. They rushed to digital really fast because it was less expensive and supposedly more targeted. And then they're not really sure what they got. And then we have all of this viewability issues that are out there, and really are 50% never really landing where you think they are with a human in front of the screen. And so we've started, the verification process is in play, which is really important. But this year, and beginning in April, ComScore published our first couple of reports, and I don't want to overstate what we did so far, but we promised the marketplace after the merger at the end of January that in April we would begin looking at unduplicated reach across platforms using the formerly Rentrack television data and all of the digital and mobile sources from ComScore. And we did that. And what we are able to see is really for the first time being able to look at consumers who watch TV only, consumers who watch digital mobile only, and then the overlap between them, so that someone like CNN, who published a report recently saying that after looking at these numbers, they see that they reached 174 million people, unduplicated reach, in the month of December. Interesting stats. No one's ever had this kind of data before. So where I think we will go is that both TV and digital are very robust platforms for advertising. We just have to understand when to reach consumers and where, and the new way of measurement is going to allow us to have the kind of information that we need. We still see TV as being about 80% on TV screens, about 80% of the viewing. That number's been pretty stable. I don't see that changing rapidly. We do see growth in digital and especially in mobile, but that said, it doesn't appear that TV is just going down. We did see, if you look at Q1 15, Q1 16, there was a 2% decline in TV that is more than made up by the TV viewing that's happening on other platforms. So it's more about understanding where and when that consumers are watching than it is consumers not watching.
But how about age demographics and watching TV on a traditional, I'll keep using the word display versus TV, demographics on that? I mean,
even millennials, the bulk of their viewing is happening on the TV screen.
When you say TV screen, you mean TV screen connected to a traditional affiliate service or a connected device?
Could be either.
Could be either. It's
could
the
be either.
rectangle
it's
on the wall.
the rectangle on the wall.
Copy that. Okay. Makes
Yep.
sense.
Okay.
That's very interesting.
All right, moving on.
Very informative for me. Fascinating.
Well, how do you watch yours?
I don't watch TV.
Oh, you have an 18-month-old at home, right?
Yeah, I don't watch TV, Marty. I work on cars. And,
It's not TV, it's HBO.
yeah, that's right. No, I don't watch HBO. I don't watch anything. I watch TV for work. That's like, if you work on cars for a living, you probably don't go home and work on your car. You know? I don't know.
And you've seen most of what's put out, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, speaking about putting out on that original content, there's an insatiable appetite for that. Some is advertised focused, some is not. Is this going to continue unabated? Without making that seem like a silly question, is the trajectory for original content spending just going to continue unabated?
I think actually, interestingly, to the point earlier, I think that a lot of content companies, I'll use Overstock.com as an example. There was a sense a couple of years ago that anyone with the capital to make content could make content. And I think that, like desktop publishing in the 1980s, anybody with a Macintosh could produce a newsletter. That very quickly became apparent that no, not everybody can do that. There's more to it than just the equipment and the capital and things like that. And so I think there was a real wave that I think and maybe I'm wrong about that, I don't have any data to back it up, but it's starting to crest that these sort of like, every day for a little while you were hearing like, this website is making a show and this website is making an original series and these people are, that has sort of gone away, I think, to a certain extent.
And that ties very much in what Laura was saying about the CBS numbers because they're so good at it.
See a return.
I think it's exactly the opposite. I think there's more and more original shows out there. They're exclusive to platforms to try to get consumers to sign up and stay with those platforms. And I know it feels a little toppy, but I'm just not sure what the cable networks or some of the other platforms are going to do. What's your strategy if you don't want original, popular programming? Non-exclusive, boring programming? And no one's out there with a Gilligan's Island rerun strategy to keep consumers. So I think over time,
even TV Land has.
Although Warner Bros. Is remastering Gilligan's Island into HDR, which I think is an amazing concept, it looks pretty good.
I think the reality is for cable networks and broadcast networks, the new normal is going to be a higher programming budget as a percentage of revenues. And maybe their margins were a little bit too high in the past. Maybe they over-earned. And going forward, maybe they're going to have to pay a little bit more for programming to keep that business model going. So, I mean, I think for the foreseeable future, original programming is going to continue.
I agree. I think original programming is the key to a successful brand. I just don't know that it is as easy to create good original programming as it sort of seems. If you have enough money, you can just do it. And I think that eventually consumers are going to realize, well, most of, some percentage of this original programming is just not any good. It's just nothing people want to watch. The quality isn't there. And I still think the brands, Lionsgate obviously being one of them, that can create extraordinarily high value for dollar in production are still going to be the drivers of that original programming. Right?
Larry?
It's excuse me. The programming at the high end is going to continue for a long time. There's no way of foreseeing that good programming is going to go away. That's going to continue. The places that will suffer the folks that really depended on default viewing. I mean, it used to be, think about it, you had your remote control and you went through and you say, oh, there's nothing on, and you found Discovery 27, and they filled themselves with this low-end programming and stuff, but it was the best that's on. There's no way that you cannot find something really good to watch now. So there's actually more good stuff to watch than you actually have time to watch. So the folks that were feeding at the bottom of that, just creating stuff, or tonnage as I call it, just to fill up space, those will go away.
How do some of the numbers that Cathy was talking about, maybe some of the ones Laura was talking about, tie into what you're seeing actually in China on your shows? Well, or on shows in general as well?
In China, you didn't have a lot of legacy technology or legacy business models. So things are a lot open. When we do shows, like we have a show called Hello Hollywood, which is Hollywood news every day and stuff. it's consumed about 75% now on mobile devices. And we actually...
How long's the episode?
They watch differently there. So we actually produce 30-minute shows and 1-hour dramas that are seen on mobiles and whatever, and they watch them. They'll watch 2-hour movies on a mobile.
That's interesting.
Because they don't really have a history of TV sets. So that kind of stuff. So the Hello Hollywood thing just continues to grow and stuff. So we've actually had to change our production technique. So when we shoot that show, we do final edit on a cell phone, so that it looks the way it's supposed to look to the viewer. Which amazes me here, that people are still taking, knowing that everybody's migrated to smaller screens, or a lot of people have migrated to smaller screens, don't bother to adjust the production technique to maximize the viewer value on that screen.
Although Cathy just told you 80% still on the big screen, and only 20% is on mobile devices.
I'm not sure I believe that.
He doesn't.
You may say it a little louder into the microphone so others can.
I'm not sure I believe that.
No, I didn't mean what you said. Your voice, you came through. But what Laura said, Laura, maybe you would repeat that, and because it's great to hear a difference of opinion. Would you repeat that, Laura?
Sure, go ahead, Laura.
Did I have a difference of opinion?
No, but go ahead, make one.
Make a difference of opinion.
We can rewind. Unfortunately, we can't rewind.
No, I guess the point I wanted to make was that reruns, no one's watching reruns, so you have to do originals. A lot of good content isn't getting found, so there's a lot of wasted dollars because there's good content, but you just can't find it because you're getting, and the numbers are, Netflix alone this year will do $10 billion of spending, of which I think it's 3 is their own. 3 billion, I think, it's their own. Is that right?
Yeah,
okay. But anyway, but everybody else is, to your point, is that everyone's taking 100 to 200 basis points of margin pressure out of their revenue, and I think that's structural. I think they're all, like TBS, when we went to their upfront last year, was like 24 new series, and they usually had 3. Yeah. Because they can't do reruns anymore. They have to do new content. And the last point I'd make that's really important is the problem with technological innovation is if you don't know what's going to be invented, you don't have the rights for it. So if you own the whole IP, then when somebody invents the new Facebook, you own the rights. You can decide whether to exploit it on Facebook. If you've shared because you let somebody else produce it, or now nothing can get done because you have to involve everyone in the process to figure out what the splits are when you go to the new tech. So this is another thing that's driving IP ownership, is that you want to own all the rights for the next kid that drops out of Harvard and creates Snapchat, or creates something that doesn't exist in 10 years. So that's another thing that's driving more IP ownership, where you own all the rights.
International distribution is another perfect example of that. If you're co-producing, you're often giving away some portion of international, and these days that's such a huge revenue driver. You can't give away international. So.
Well, I know from a feature film point of view, what was when I started in the industry, 70 to 80% of revenue was North America, and the other 20 to 30 was everywhere else. Yeah. Now that 20 to 30 is North America, and the 70 to 80 is everywhere else, and that's going to continue going in those directions. But in terms of the content you get in China, Larry, what is going to happen in getting some of that content, whether it's coming from China, whether it's coming from wherever else, Western Europe even, are we going to get some of that here at some point? For the longest time, the U.S. largest contributor to the balance of payments was our content, broadly speaking. Very little of it comes back in this direction. Is that going to happen, or is there too much cultural tie-in in various countries, China and elsewhere, for it to get here?
I think there's actually a mixed answer there. I mean, number one, like I say, the business model that we've been following as of late is really to use China to develop formats that we then sell around the world. So we actually have our first case of a reality show we developed in China. We've actually made a sale in the U.S. for it, now talking other places. So is it, you're going to see a Chinese show on U.S. TV? No. But you'll see things that are derived in other places. I mean, Israel has become a great country for developing formats now and testing ground because the economics work. So places like China are not just good for making coffee cups and television sets and things like that. You could actually produce, like I say, as an independent, I can't play the game in the U.S. anymore because it's just too expensive to be an independent and have to fight the Murdochs. You know, if it's going to cost you $5 million or $10 million to do a pilot, you got to do 10 pilots to get one TV show. That's a hard game to play for an indie. But if I can do pilots for 250 in China, I can then play the game on a global scale as well as anybody else.
Couple of points. One is, Larry, my numbers are correct. And importantly, we are receiving set-top box, mobile, digital information in China from about 3 billion, I think, is about the number that we're getting right now. And you are accurate in terms of we get it all. We get it from all platforms, and measurement started measuring from all platforms at the census level, which is exciting for us because here we've had to go back and get permissions and get deals in place and be able to pull in the data, where the work that we're doing in China is starting from that ground of understanding that it's every platform and that we get that data from every platform. So I think that's really important. And to one thing that Laura said about all the great content out there, that's why one of the reasons what we think it is so important, not just to measure 3 days or 7 days, but to look at everything on DVR, everything on digital for the entire month and look at it in the context of a month versus just buying television off of what happens on the first 3 days, I think is going to be more and more difficult as time goes on. And so our approach is really about measuring everything when it's viewed, because you go to work and you hear about some great show that you knew nothing about, and it's available on video on demand, or that you can find it online, or that's how you start watching it. And then we start to see viewers migrate back to the linear for the newest episode, or catch up on Saturdays and Sundays, so that when the regular episode comes out on Thursday night, that they're there in front of the TV watching it. So it's really fascinating to see how consumers are finding new content and then where they end up watching it, and that changes, and it's different by category, by group, by consumer.
Using your word finding really connotes making sure there's some good marketing behind a piece so that people are aware of it, even if it's a bad trailer like Ghostbusters. How far out there before IP delivery really becomes dominant? I mean, it's out there now, it's significant right now, but still not significant. 5 years, 10 years, longer? Cable company's still going to be there because getting content over a piece of wire is probably still better than wireless?
Yeah, there's always going to be an affiliate at some point. You're going to be buying a connection to, be it the internet, be it the content network, be it whatever. I think it's just a matter of how much regulation gets ratcheted in. I mean, I think the FCC stepping in to regulate set-top boxes is entirely based on the affiliates not being responsive enough to the customer base, and now they're in a place where they're being legislated, which is the worst. You don't want to be in a place where the government steps in and tells you how to run a segment of your business, because that really limits flexibility, and on the consumer side may actually limit flexibility in the long run as well, because legislation isn't as flexible as simply giving people what they want.
So getting content over a wire is still prevalent, but the reason I asked earlier about people who have broadband at home, stat that I have from Pew Research is 33% of U.S. adults do not have broadband at home, meaning they're either just watching on their cell phone, casting up through Roku or Chromecast or any of the sticks. So at some point, perhaps, and this is more, I'm going to put it in the form of a question, what is the spectrum auction that's been going on and its implementation down the road going to do to that number? Are we going to have a modem at home or a router at home that goes from my cell phone or from cellular out of the sky into that router at my home and then into all my devices? Is that going to have an impact at some point? Or when we get into higher bandwidth type of content, that's still going to be a problem? There was several questions wrapped in there.
Yeah,
Try to
there's a
figure
lot
that
in
one
there,
out.
Marty.
Well, the spectrum auction, I think, just allows the consumer to be more mobile. But I think what the cable industry is going to do is they've been good at working together, and so they're going to put hotspots up with their head ends, and so you're going to pay them to be able to, when you're on your phone, be out of home and download video, because otherwise you're going to be using your cell network and Verizon's going to charge you extra. So the cable guy's going to say, no, pay us $5 a month and we'll put up Wi-Fi hotspots all around your neighborhood, so no matter where you are, you can download video on Wi-Fi, because then you don't go through Verizon, you don't pay the cell bill. So I think we'll see a little more competition over the network. And so I think it's great that this bandwidth is being freed up, because it wasn't being used by the traditional broadcasters. It was being wasted by them.
Yeah.
So this is at least a better use. I think it's largely the effective lobbying of the Silicon Valley, but frankly, Silicon Valley is sort of irritating Washington, D.C. these days. So we'll see if Silicon Valley is, if the Washington, D.C. is the champion for Google and Facebook and these Silicon Valley companies over the next 5 years, as actively as they have been over the last 5 years against the cable industry.
Okay, live TV and sports. Couple quick questions, and we'll get to questions. And you've got first question when we're ready. The Olympics are coming up. What can we expect to happen there? Great, Brazil this year. In 2 years, it's going to be Korea for one of the most technologically astute countries in the world. Korea for their Winter Olympics, and then 2 years after that, one of the other most significantly technologically astute countries, Japan, for the Summer Olympics 4 years from now. But what are we going to see in Brazil from a TV point of view that's going to make us say, this is how it's going to be from here on out? Any predictions? It does call for speculation, Your Honor. No?
Well, I think
Here we go.
more VOD, both on TV and on other forms of content. You've already seen NBC loosen the reins in terms of the ability for consumers to be able to get at this content. I think that it will do very well in terms of advertising revenue, and then head right into the political season. So I think that 2016 is a great year for us. And then I worry a little bit about what happens in 2017 on the advertising front, just because I think we're going to have a big year, and we need to be planning for the next year and what we're going to do creatively to make sure that we.
But the election cycle isn't something new. We're just, this is the first one in the modern era, and 4 years from now will be the first one in the modern era again.
Right.
Because there isn't going to be a normal.
That's true.
Last thing, just because Steve brought it up about, I think you said it partly tongue-in-cheek about Gilligan's Island going to HDR.
No, they literally are. They're doing it.
Okay. Do you or anyone else see, it does look good? You seen it?
It looks fantastic.
Okay, well, HDR looks great generally. Anybody that doesn't know what who does not know HDR? You're going to hear, so only one hand went up. High dynamic range. I mean, it's just going to look better. It's 4K, it's UHD, but blacker blacks and whiter whites. Is that a
higher color as well?
Okay.
It's by a function of brightness.
Larry's got a comment. You're about to say something, or am I reading into that?
No, I mean, there are certain things, I think just because technology allows you to do something doesn't mean the consumer really wants to do it. I mean, so I think that the movement has gone to incredibly high quality stuff. I mean, the programming that's on TV is amazing now. I can't consume it all. I don't really think that just because you enhance something and make it look better, it's going to move me to watch that kind of stuff.
You don't want to see the skipper in HDR?
Oh, he looks so
No, you
good.
see the pit bulls.
And listen, like fundamentally, I'm hugely against the colorizing of black and white films and things. Like I have a fairly fundamental disagreement with that. But I just feel like it looks good.
What was the question? I don't even know what the question was.
HDR. Do you see that coming up? I mean, at CES this year, more than the prior year, and probably next year will be more so than this past year, the prevalence of high dynamic range.
Well, how about virtual reality beyond gaming?
I think there's.
It's freaky.
I'll talk about HDR first. I think HDR fundamentally for the television market is possibly as significant of a change as SD to HD. I think from a distribution standpoint, to your point about bandwidth and the fact that bandwidth is a major consideration for content distributors. How much bandwidth do the average U.S. consumer honestly have? You guys probably know. You know, it's not a lot. You know, and if you have a number of bits that you can send, how do you best use those? HDR, maybe a 12% lift over the standard HD picture. You know, UHD, 3 times, at least double. You know, it's like HDR is a fundamentally impactful technology on a 6-inch screen or a 60-foot screen, and UHD you can't say the same thing about. So I think it's going to be very important. But again, it's just another reason to buy a new television. I don't think it's going to change storytelling. Whereas VR, I think, genuinely will take us back to a time where we told stories that were non-directed by camera, and in the theater world we have at least partially an understanding of how to do that. I think that, you know, if you look at things like Sleep No More and Theater in the Round sort of concept or immersive concept theater projects, which are extraordinarily popular, you know, that type of storytelling is fundamentally different from what we do in film and television right now. So we have to really, really, really relearn. Not just like, well, 3D, you have to be careful how you shoot things, but I can't say where you're going to be looking, or really, so I have to compel you to do what I want you to do, as opposed to force you to do what I want you to do to tell my story. And we used to know how to do that really well, and I think that, you know, we sort of, as a film and television making community, need to relearn how to do that, because I think VR will be, maybe not in the very near future, because it's still extraordinarily expensive for the average consumer, but in the near future, it will be a storytelling medium. How popular it will be, I think, depends on how many devices get out there.
All right, so we're going to move to questions. You have your question? Is it still, or will we answered it in some other discussion point?
One for Cathy, one for Larry. Cathy, I'm Ty Green on the tech company. And
Hi, Ty.
I'm a TV company as well. In technology, we iterate very quickly in software to obtain, you know, like not months, days. Do you think, even with the studios, that they can iterate that quickly based on what your data is telling them for moving forward within a week for the content? And then for Larry, do you think your probability, do you have a higher probability of success of the shows that you have produced in China, and you said you're swinging the bat, that it gives you a greater probability of having your things so here, since you know, proving ground there?
So I'll start by saying that one of the challenges of having predictive research is, can you react fast enough? And I think you put your finger on it very well. But I do find that both first in the advertising world, where it's shorter form content, and so we're able to change some things up based on quick information, almost real time, that we're finding out about the viewing of a specific ad and what's resonating with the consumer. We have been able to see very quick turnaround times in changing up of the campaigns, where both on where they're placed to hit the targeted audience, as well as the content of that. For movie pictures, which is where we were talking about this, I think the earlier in the cycle that we can provide the information and the analysis, then the better opportunity. Right now, I would say where we're impacting is on the marketing. And so if that isn't the right trailer for Ghostbusters, maybe we can help figure out what would resonate and use that information to change the marketing and the target for that market. But I do believe that over time, data becomes more and more real time, and the earlier in the cycle we're able to get it, then we can have more impact on the storyline, on the characters, et cetera.
Yeah, I think the answer is actually quite obvious. I mean, number one, we're in a place with no legacy systems and where economics are very, very favorable. To here, you know, you start a TV show, hopefully you get it on and maybe you get an order of 4, and you better get it right very quickly, otherwise you're gone. So even though that show might have had capabilities of tweaking it, changing cast, changing story, whatever, a lot of times you don't get that opportunity here. In China, because the cost is so low, I can take chances on things. I could say, you know what, this person, my gut tells me it's good, and you know what, the downside, it's not $5 million, it's $200,000. There's a lot of that. I mean, again, it goes back to Broadway. You don't start your play on Broadway under the eye of the New York Times reviewer, where the economics are incredibly high, and mistakes cost you a lot of money. Started someplace, started Connecticut, started on Broadway, where you could tweak and make it work. When I get an order for a show in China, my typical order is 30 episodes.
Wow.
Which lets me think as a creator of really developing story and continuity and characters and stuff very differently than here, where I know I better hit the home run real quick or I'm gone.
Wow.
This lady here.
Just to follow up on that, I'm curious, I know your standard budget for a pilot might be $5 million, but we're looking at all these digital companies that are doing pilots for like way below that. What's keeping you from, working with new technology, less experienced people?
Well, first I said a budget for a network TV show here is $5 million and upwards, really. We work with all new technology. I mean, quite honestly, our way of storytelling is we tell stories that are created to go across multiple platforms. So when we create something, we are looking and saying, okay, what's the TV component, what's the internet component, whatever the story. We always think of stories as having to tell the entire story in that 1 hour block or that 30-second block, or whether you consume it on a different device at a different time. But we're really looking at, can you tell stories that go across different platforms and the way the story is told and what the story is? So different parts of the story are consumed in different places, and you don't have to get that 1 hour. I don't know if that quite makes sense, but we create something for the TV screen, but then we have other parts of the story that live only on a mobile device and stuff. So even if you didn't watch it on the mobile device, you still got the story there, or you didn't have to watch every single thing that we created. So, I mean, we use technology. Our cost of doing pilots for stuff is around $250,000, and we're talking broadcast level stuff. A lot of stuff I see created by digital companies here, you look at it and quite honestly, it's crap. No, I mean, it's just not good. Everybody thinks that their roommate, give them an iPhone, they're going to go and film the next, E.T. or something. It's just not true. I mean, there are people that are very good at creating visual experiences that people want to put their butt somewhere and watch. I mean, and most of the time, it's not the college roommate.
Other questions? Lady here.
Yeah, so we see a lot of companies and studios and networks creating short-form content for their online viewers. Just what you were explaining, Larry. Are you anticipating that we will move towards a shorter, even shorter than half hour, maybe 12-minute episodes on TV rather than online?
Meaning here in North America?
Yeah.
Well, I think, some of it has to do with the way you build stories and the way you build story arcs within an episode. I'll tell you what we're doing in China now with platforms. So we build it as almost a traditional half-hour sitcom, but we then offer it up on Monday, Wednesday, Thursday. So we serialize an episode. So it's 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes and stuff. And it affects the way we write it because we know some people are only going to watch that first 10 minutes and then some people watch the second.
And that's released on television or on mobile?
That we're doing for laptops and mobile.
We did that within treatment a number of years ago, where every day of the week was a different patient, and the episode was collected on the Friday as a half hour, or you could watch it throughout the week as the 10-minute.
Yeah, that's the way we do it in China, and it's working so far incredibly effectively.
And one way to get funding is to, some of these directors coming out of the TV landscape here that are established are doing 5 minutes that they aggregate into 90 minutes, and then they go offshore and they sell it for international pre-sales rights as a film, but then they put it on the digital platform here, so they've covered the cost. and created it because of the international, and then they take and they shop it to Yahoo, AOL, Facebook, and say, hey, you can release it in 5-minute episodes all at once, or you can do it as a film, whatever you want.
I think it'll be interesting to watch what AT&T does with full screen. Because they're already offering short-form content online, and you could imagine that they could make a channel or a network out of that short-form content and begin to offer that throughout their television product as well over DirecTV. So I think it will be, I think it will be offered everywhere in different ways. I think some of the companies to watch are these operators that are now building their skinny bundles in short form content and those kinds of things, because they have the ability to try that out pretty easily, is just put it on as a channel.
Well, and certainly when we launched HBO Go, like 6 years ago, we noticed our interstitials, the behind-the-scenes pieces, the media blurbs and things about our shows. All of a sudden, viewership on the mobile platform spiked like crazy, and we kind of didn't realize right off the bat it was because that's what you're going to watch on the train. You have a 5-minute train ride from downtown to uptown or something, and you're going to watch that. You're not going to watch 5 minutes of a 30-minute show. It doesn't, it's not the appropriate venue. You're going to watch something quickly about something you're interested in, and so we definitely changed our strategy on how we present that. We didn't really make anything differently. We just sort of changed how you discover that content on the mobile platform. It's easier to find that short form stuff around the individual properties than it maybe is on the link.
So join me please in thanking the panel for a great job, great discussion today. Thank you for being here. Yeah.
It's a pleasure.
How do you happen to be here?
I go back.
Oh, I've got one. It's